Hello and welcome to the Witness History podcast from the BBC World Service with me, Rebecca Kesby. And of all the revolutions that swept across Eastern Europe in the winter of 1989, the overthrow of the Ceaușescus in Romania was the bloodiest. I've been speaking to a key figure in the lead-up to the revolt. It started outside his house.
The unrest started in Timisoara in Transylvania, following the arrest of Pastor László Tőkés.
László Tőkés, who's an outspoken critic of the government, refused to leave when the secret police came to arrest him.
I did not want to become a revolutionary. I could not imagine that we have any chance to defeat the regime. But step by step, my attitude was radicalized because we had to speak out.
In December 1989, László Tőkés was a young Protestant pastor for the minority Hungarian community in the western city of Timisoara. He'd fallen foul of the oppressive Romanian secret police, the Securitate. The communists didn't like his sermons or his popularity. But when they tried to arrest him, hundreds of people surrounded his house in an effort to protect him. It was the beginning of the revolution, but the roots of the discontent had been years in the making.
We can characterize those times with misery, poverty, and total lack of individual human rights. Society was frightened by the Securitate, the Romanian Secret Service.
And what about Nicolae Ceaușescu? How would you describe him?
He was a primitive man. He could not judge between good and bad. He was a Stalinist type dictator. He did not want to introduce any reform in the country. The Romanian system became more and more cruel.
In fact, Nicolae Ceaușescu had a reputation as a monster. Together with his wife Elena, he ruled Romania as a brutal personality cult. Every aspect of ordinary life was controlled. Abortion was banned, but so was contraception. It was even illegal to own a typewriter.
We were under total control. For example, I had to hide my typewriter. Nearly everybody surrounding me were spies. My bishop was, for example, a spy of the Securitate. I myself all the time was persecuted. My parochians were all the time harassed. The lack of trust was terrible between people.
But through his work in the church, László Tőkés found that trust could be rebuilt and a new community emerged.
The church became a center of peaceful opposition. I did not make politics in the church. I only tried to express with the words of God that we must obey God rather than men, and all the time I chose parts from the Bible which reflecting the very situation in Romania.
It wasn't just that he was a gifted preacher. He was the first man they'd ever known who was prepared to stand up and challenge the Ceaușescu dictatorship and its deadly security network.
As Protestants, we had the example of Martin Luther or John Calvin, the great reformators, the principle of resistance against the rulers, the kings, which are acting against the will of God.
Identified as a troublemaker by the authorities, László Tőkés's bishop tried to move him to a quiet country parish where he'd have less influence at the beginning of 1989. But Tőkés refused to go. He recorded an interview for Hungarian TV in secret, calling for change. When it was broadcast in July, it was picked up by news channels around the world. His situation then became very dangerous.
I retired into a voluntary exile in my house. I did not leave my house at all. It was very dangerous to go out. You could be kidnapped. We barricaded the doors.
The authorities had suspended his pay and cut off his power lines. His wife Edith was pregnant, and the couple relied on food and supplies brought by loyal parishioners for months. But change was already sweeping across Europe. In November 1989, the Berlin Wall fell. One by one, communist governments were collapsing or reforming, except in Romania. On December the 15th, fearing his imminent arrest, locals formed a human chain around Pastor Tőkés's house.
People began to gather around my church. More and more people gathered.
In the crowd, more than 100 mainly ethnic Hungarian church members, but joining them, many more ethnic Romanians, standing in solidarity.
We were trusting God that He will not abandon us, so dared to stand up against the monstrous dictatorship. We were totally united. The spirit of brotherhood between all the citizens of Romania was full and beautiful.
Then something extraordinary happened. The crowd went from singing church hymns to patriotic songs to chanting for the end of Ceaușescu's rule.
That was the psychological turn point. People began to shout against the regime, liberty, liberty, down with Ceaușescu. I was frightened, sincerely to say, I was frightened of the probable consequences of their brave resistance. But on the other hand, I was glad that people realized that we cannot keep silent anymore.
Nicolae Ceaușescu is fighting for his political life in the only way he knows how, the violent suppression of any kind of protest.
The army were very cruel, very violent. About 50 people were killed in a day. That was the bloodiest day in Timisoara.
It was the beginning of the end for the Ceaușescus. As news spread of the uprising in Timisoara, a wave of protests broke out in towns and cities across Romania.
Fighting broke out, demonstrators attacking the Ceaușescu supporters.
For the first time, Romanians dared show their true feelings.
Meanwhile, László Tőkés and his wife had been arrested.
A whole week we were interrogated. They wanted to confess that I was a spy of the CIA and to make a public declaration in the TV. It was clear for us that we are to be executed or imprisoned.
Edith was by now heavily pregnant. Brutal though the Securitate were, her conditions seemed to prevent them from deploying the very worst interrogation techniques.
The officers all the time wanted to separate her from me, to transport her into a hospital, but she was very faithful and did not leave me. Our little daughter, which later on was born, I think was our angel in that time and protected us in those threatening days when we were prepared for the worst.
Back in Bucharest, the regime was unravelling and a full-scale uprising was underway.
And everywhere, the sound of automatic fire. No one can be certain which side it's coming from.
Only hardline loyalist troops were defending the Ceaușescus. Most of the army were now fighting on the side of the revolutionaries.
At the television station, which has played a central part in the spread of the revolution, men still loyal to Ceaușescu were firing at the army. The army has effectively become the main revolutionary force.
Thanks to God, we had a little radio apparatus and we were informed that the revolution broke out and the Ceaușescu couple is in run.
Frați români, am venit aici la
Romanian brothers, we come here to the Romanian Broadcasting Company to tell you that the dictator has fallen, to let you know that the country is free.
The whole spirituality of Christmas was full of hopes. Miraculously, we considered a gift of God on Christmas. It was a wonder. I think that was the most joyful day in our full life.
Just a couple of days later, on the 25th, Christmas Day in Romania, Nicolae and Elena Ceaușescu were found guilty of crimes against humanity in a hastily arranged military trial. They were sentenced to immediate death by firing squad. László Tőkés went on to become a bishop and later a member of the European Parliament. He was speaking to me, Rebecca Kesby, for Witness History.